Hey guys, Omar here, and I thought today would be fun to talk about what goes through my mind before I actually start posing my subject during a portrait session. There's all these little calculations that happen, so let's go through it, and hopefully this will help someone out there. Psst, also, stay tuned to the end for a little hint on how to reduce your anxiety before a portrait session. All right, the first thing I think about always is light. And light has a bunch of subcategories. It's not just light. You have to think about a lot. And I made a couple of videos on this. I'll link them below. But the first one is, what's the quality of light? Like, what do I want to achieve in this portrait? Do I want a soft, painterly portrait? Or do I want something a little harsher and cool? Now, the quality of light can change dramatically if you move further away from the light source. So, for example, if you're shooting at the entrance of an alleyway, I usually want my subject to be like very close to the entrance of the alleyway. The deeper you go into that alleyway, the worse the quality of light gets. So a lot of time, the reason I'm doing this is because during a portrait session, I actually always have my hands out because I'm looking to see what the light does. And I'm always looking for this nice broad light on my hands. And if you turn to the side, you can actually see shadows, your hand having shadows. So I'm always using my hands to kind of figure out where the best soft quality of light. Like my style of portraits is a little bit more painterly and soft. I shoot mostly teens and, parents like me. We want to reduce our wrinkles. So I'm always looking for broad light that's nice and soft. The other subcategory is, what's the light doing? What is it bouncing off? So I'm always nervous about color casts. This is always a pain later when you're trying to fix. You don't understand why someone's skin is so red or greenish, or you blame the camera mostly, but a lot of times is because you're shooting on red brick or the building across the street. I've done this many times, this mistake. The building across the street is brick, and so the light is sort of casting a reddish hue on people. So I try as best as I can. I look around, I try to find the most neutral bounce off any kind of structures. So gray sidewalks I'm looking for. I'm always looking for buildings that are silver or white. And beige, you can usually get away with beige buildings, but for the most part, I try to stay away from anything green or reddish or orange. If we're shooting near grass, I always try to have people's back to the grass. And a lot of times you can put people on the sidewalk so that the sidewalk kind of kicks up better light on them and the grass is behind them. If you put people on grass, if the sun is hitting the grass, you're going to get some weird green hues under people's chin. All right, so I have quality, I have direction, I make sure there's no color casts. And the last thing I do is, do I need to sort of manipulate this light in any way? Sometimes you're super lucky, and with the bounce from the sidewalk and the building and the softness from the clouds, you get lucky, you don't need to do anything. But once you get better at shooting portraits, you start to notice if the light is just maybe a little too small in people's eyes, if there's a little bit too much uplighting from the sidewalk, if you want a little bit more directionality from the light or a little pop. The first thing I do is I bring out a reflector. We start with a reflector, sort of fill in the shadows or give a little pop in the eye. And the last resort, these are the last two. So reflector for a little pop, and the last one is I'll bring out a light. And this changes your portrait session. I shoot mostly teens and parents, and I don't have much time because the energy level, I usually have high energy level in my portrait sessions. So once you start to bring out lights, it slows things down and can bring the energy of the portrait session to more of working as opposed to a little bit more, hey, let's go, fun, fun, fun. So you have to assess that as well. And so bringing out a light, I will do it if the portrait calls for it, but I try to avoid as much as possible. But every now and then you're going to have to pop a light in to get the right directionality of the light, the right directionality of the light, the quality of the light, because you can control it from a flash. But again, that's kind of a last resort, or if that's a look I'm going for. Okay, once I have the light, the second thing I'm looking for is the scene. And in the scene, I'm looking for shapes is the first thing. So doorways, windows, things I can put in my composition to balance the composition. That's what I'm always looking for, is balance in the portrait. So if I have a kid on a wall, is there a window or a door to sort of balance out the portrait? If you just have a kid on a wall plain, it's not as good as having maybe two like structures in the back or two textures in the back. So I'm always looking for shapes and things that can give you a little bit more interest in the image. I'll also look for steps and lines and repeating patterns in my composition, things that can sort of point to my subject or give some kind of shapes. I'm always looking for lines. We are looking at our subject and the pose that the subject is doing, but I'm always kind of looking at doorways and frames and lines and the angle of steps. A lot of times all this stuff kind of points to my subject. These are things that you can't really map out. You kind of have to just start looking at a lot of photographs and feeling it. And I would recommend practicing with either a friend or kids, or just not random kids, should be your kids. And remember, tune in to the end. I'm going to give you a little hint on anxiety reduction. So when you get your subject in a spot, you're actually ready to go. And don't skip ahead. You got to listen to everything I say. Now, the last one actually has to do more with the subject than the location. If you have a client that's a little shy, you have to think about like how public this location is. I've had portrait sessions where the kid is so distracted because people think they're famous. They keep looking at them. So I have to think about that too. It's more important to maybe go somewhere a little bit more private. If the person is shyer, you're going to have those locations ready, because that will give you better portraits of the person as opposed to an awesomer location, but there's a lot of foot traffic. All right, the next one takes a little bit of effort on your part, but if you talk to your clients beforehand, you can sort of match up wardrobe with colors in the scene. And that's the other thing I'm looking for, is colors that will match the wardrobe or what the person is wearing. Now, again, you have to talk to your clients beforehand, because if we're going to a portrait session, I bet most of us would default to wearing black or something that's safe, slimming. Black is always slimming. And it makes more sense to talk about, pastel colors. A lot of people don't wear red too often, and red works great in certain scenes. So black is very common, white is very common, but try to get some pops of color in the wardrobe. And then the thing I look for is scenes, like colors in the location that would complement the wardrobe. And this is going to help your portraiture a lot. Like, you actually, once people don't know when they look at a picture, but they're like, oh, I like this. And a lot of times that has to do with how you're using color in the scene with the person. All right, the next one is depth. I always think about how deep we want to go in the scene. And this has a lot to do with lens choice. So for example, if I have a location that has a beautiful cobble road, it's long, we have a lot of depth, I can put my subject on the road, back up, and use a lens that's longer. So in that case, I'm thinking that I want to use, instead of particular doors and steps and things like that, I actually want blobs in the background. And there's a method to the madness, by the way. The blobs that are in the background, the bokeh in the background, I try to line it up where it fits the person's composition, okay, where the person's pose. And I'm looking for colors back there. And the main thing is I'm trying to avoid the sky in the background as best as I can. So the first thing, in depth, I'm looking for shapes and patterns in the background. And so that's usually your 85. I've used a 105 for that. A 70 to 200 is a great way to sort of use depth that way. If there's less depth, let's say I'm shooting on a curb, or there's a store or some kind of interesting background, I'll switch lens choice to something a little closer. So this is my 50 millimeter 1.4 usually, or anything like that, 35 millimeter, or even wider. But it's where my lens choice shows a little bit more of the environment. The other way to use depth that I'm always thinking about is for a headshot. So I always like foreground, person, and then beautiful background. It's a nice way. Usually I shoot diagonal with a longer lens, like an 85, 105, but it's a good way to get a beautiful headshot of someone. And the last thing I love looking for is grunge. This is like kind of a personal style thing of mine, but I love the juxtaposition of having, you know, beauty with ugly. And here in New Jersey, we have we have a lot of ugly, like grungy, graffiti, dirty streets, decay, urban decay. And so I love putting a subject that's dressed beautifully in this sort of environment. Okay, the bonus tip. The best way to reduce anxiety with all the stuff, composition, looking for light, is to go a day earlier, a week earlier, and check out the place, or use Google Maps. I made a video on it. I'll link it up below, how you can actually use Google to sort of plan your portrait session. But nothing is better than just walking around and leaving your camera in your bag and using your eyes to sort of frame things up. And with your phone, you could, while you're walking around and scouting, a lot of times I'll be like, oh, okay, that'll work. I could put the person here, angle. You need time to think, because when you're with your clients, you should be relaxed and you should be keeping them relaxed, because taking your portraits is kind of sometimes a little stressful. So they can feed off your calmness because you're prepared, and that'll reduce your anxiety, their anxiety, the world's anxiety. I hope that helped you. I'll see you guys next time.